So this is decarbonizing one purchase at a time. I'm Mike D, the one and only. Yes, somebody gets it. Doing strategy work for Triangle Digital, making sure that we connect all of these dots. And that's exactly what we're going to do today with this panel, is look at the scope 3 accounting and focus on payments and supply chains, clients, decarbonization, kind of connecting those dots. So I'll let you all introduce yourself. Sri.
Yeah, hi. Sri, Srinand, Yellowman Chili, just call me Sri. That's all good. How much depth do you want as to who I am? Okay.
You can go light.
I've always worked predominantly at CPA advisory firms like KPMG and whatnot. I am not an auditor. I can't do that work. It really bothers me. I have a chemistry degree and I'm an environmental scientist by trade. Left KPMG after 9 years in Australia and LA. Started building solar farms up and down the east coast of the US. Exited that fund, and now I lead BDO's sustainability practice, which encompasses a ton of different things. But the reason I'm here is because Mike and I work very closely, him with Triangle, myself with BDO, on delivering what we call carbon credit advisory, which is allowing companies that make low carbon investments the pathway to monetizing that investment through carbon credits. So some of you have seen me before this week. Condolences. Those that I don't know, I'm sure you'll get to know me, but that's me. I live in Dallas. Don't hold that against me.
Brian Corelli, so VP of Sustainability and Partnerships here at Infor. I work within our Infor Nexus group, which is supply chain management software. So working with very large supply chains, Nike, Caterpillar, Lululemon, trying to figure out how to make them more sustainable, help them reach their goals, help them with compliance and any upcoming regulations, and also understanding that. And we've just launched a product called NextTrace. The idea behind it is you map out your supply chain through what we call an invitation exercise. So send invitations from your suppliers on up. And then after you've mapped them out and we have them engaged in the platform, then trace your goods so you can actually figure out what went into the carbon or the wastewater or whatever else it is within your products. And I'm going to kind of tie that back to the last panel that we just had.
Tom Herman, I'm with EcoClaim, and we measure the supply chain of the insurance industry, scope 3 emissions associated with property claims. Prior to this, I was with Metacarbon, where we were doing consumer packaged goods, carbon offsetting at point of sale, so small denomination carbon credits.
So scope 3, there's a data challenge there, and connecting life cycle assessments into EPDs. So I didn't know if you wanted to make any points on how that's a challenge and how we can potentially solve it, which would be awesome. I'm here for solutions this week.
Jesus, Mike, starting with a big elephant, aren't you? I mean, you're the Infor guy. You want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, sure, I'll give this a shot. So if you want to get to scope 3, there's only one way to go there. Does anyone know how we figure out scope 3 emissions? You trace your goods and you ask the suppliers and you start directly engaging with them, because otherwise you're just guessing. So, we can give the best estimate of what went into this chair, but was this thing produced in China or Vietnam? We don't know. Great, it was China. Now we know that. Where was the fabric produced? Was that in China or Vietnam? Because that's really going to impact your scope 3 emissions. And today we're doing our best guesses, just as a society, as what it is into what it is. We had all these really nice heuristics and algorithms, and that's great. But at Nexus, we are already directly connected to tier 1 suppliers, and now we're going end tier, we call it with that. So tier 1 suppliers, again, tell us your tier 2s. And without this direct engagement, we're just guessing. So our goal is to, when you see digital product passport, that's exactly part of what the vision we're building. But while you're figuring out your chain of custody, why don't we also figure out what went into that factory, what their electricity usage is, their wastewater usage, et cetera. And I think that's how we solve this problem. Should be pretty simple.
Can I play devil's advocate there?
Absolutely.
It's expensive.
Very much so.
It is a pain in the backside for a company to go through level 1, level 2, level 3 to the nth degree, and then talk about things like financed emissions as part of scope 3 without any clear guidance, and get a reasonable, accurate description of what their scope 3 is without significant cost implied. That's the challenge I face a lot of the time when, I get these middle market companies. We're BDO, right? We're just behind KPMG, EY, Deloitte, all those guys, but the only difference is price. Half of us come from those shops anyway. But the clients we deal with, sorry to anyone who's Big Four, My brother's Big Four. So when I get a middle market company who, you know, might be a $200 million company, I can't ask them to spend a couple of $1 million on their tracing. That's just a ridiculous scenario. What they want to do is hit minimum compliance for what they need to do. But the trick to downstream emissions, I'm sure we'll get into this later, is to show the value in the efficiencies within them and how we drive innovation amongst them to have those carbon credit attributes and energy savings and resource savings all the way through that level 3, 2, and 1 supply chain.
And a big part of that, like, right, if this office space is in a tall building here in New York City, because there's a bunch of those, not every building has the metering and the data. So there's a lot of opportunity in that space to expand on how we aggregate data, collect data, because you can put really affordable sensors on meters, electrical panels, and you don't have to do this really expensive metering proposition that you used to do. I think like skilling those things that are working. I don't know, Tom, if you have any of those strategies or solutions that could play into the success of this.
I stick with the 80-20 rule because Shree's right. If you try and do the 20%, it's just too much work. So I would look at, if you're putting new sheetrock up after a flood, you know, are you going to measure the carbon footprint of the sheetrock, which is pretty easy to do, or are you going to also include the tape, the mud, the screws, and the electricity in the room? You've really got to focus on the big ticket items, big ticket from a carbon emissions perspective, which we know, and the stuff which is readily available data. So PCAF standards today say for the insurance industry, you really just need a financial ratio between premiums paid, total revenue, and your emissions from your supply chain. The reason they selected that is simply because that is the data that's available. So it's really about figuring out, is it worth putting a meter on every floor, or can you really just divide this building by 33 and call it a day? Where do you want to focus your effort on the supply chain? And we're talking one purchase at a time. So then why does it matter when I'm buying a shirt? One shirt, the carbon footprint might be less than a kilogram. It might be in the grams. So doing that calculation isn't really worth it. Where it's worth it is where Stree's working, or where Brian is working, which is in making the decisions as you build your supply chain.
And then how would, Amazon or a Costco or a consumer on the back end, having the SKU or the barcode while they're buying a product, right? So if we were able to allocate for a corporation, all of the purchases that you had on your credit card for the month, and then you understand that, chicken is X amount of kilograms of CO2 and your shirt is something else. At the end of the month, you'd be able to aggregate that, and then using a platform or like pulling that data together, you could buy carbon credits and zero out your carbon emissions. How would the consumer have some sort of, or a corporation on the back end, be able to integrate that level of data?
Well, what are you trying to do to me today?
Or why?
Yeah.
Why would you want to do that? And whose responsibility is it? Is it yours wearing the shirt? Or should the responsibility be with the manufacturer?
So one of the things we're trying to do is make it seamless. Right. So yeah, let's imagine we're buying a shirt, but actually let me give you a real life description. So there's a wind turbine manufacturer, American, relocated, came to me and said they build the nacelle. But everyone know what a nacelle is? The housing for the turbine at the back, the thing that often breaks. But they're making that from plant fibers as opposed to the traditional carbon intense fiber product, whatever you want to call it. So if we can decarbonize that part of that industry, then the end user of that energy already has a quasi decarbonized product going that they are utilizing. So it's happening without them knowing about it. And then at the end of the day, the requirement and the carbon footprint of what we're talking about at that tier 1 level is so minimized, and there are carbon credits available from the production cycle because it is so efficient, and it doesn't really take much to decarbonize at the end of the day, right? So we want it to be seamless, and that's why BDO, we stood up a carbon credit advisory that looks at investments in low carbon products. Now, whether you like that or not, I know Tom and I have put the gloves on a couple of times this week already. Whether you like that or not, that's how we drive investment to innovation throughout the value chain, by providing something like carbon credits that will drive money towards low carbon products and seamlessly decarbonize value chains and supply chains along the way.
So in essence, what you're saying, and I think what you're saying also is, it's like if we went to 8 billion people and we asked them to recycle the plastic bottles, we're not going to have success. But if you go back up the supply chain and change the infrastructure so that the plastic bottle is not something that persists in the environment, so you're changing the infrastructure behind the scenes, and the customer is just a path through on a way more sustainable journey.
The issue we've had in the past is that's really expensive, because there is no marketable credit or reference or product that you can sell from that environmental benefit. But now with the previous panel, there's nothing like a political panel to make an Australian's head spin in this country. But now there is a pathway to a digital financial instrument that could help fund that innovation at that base level. Am I talking rubbish to you? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. So you're talking about the bill of material, the material substitutions, right? Because that's what's feeding your scope 3 category 4 upstream emissions.
Mhm.
How receptive are these clients and firms that are making stuff to doing that?
Some are already doing it.
Really?
I've got clients who, are reducing clinker percentage in concrete by 80%, right? But they are not taking use of the carbon credits that they could potentially be minting from that to allow the construction company at that tier level, at that tier 1 level, to purchase those carbon credits so that they could reinvest in a more efficient form of carbon, whether it's algae or whatever it is. There's this whole ecosystem that's starting to get driven, and me and Mike have I guess it's a privilege of being towards the front of it.
Why aren't they taking credit? Is it just, I'll leave it at that. Why aren't they taking,
Yeah.
leaving money on the table? Why aren't they?
Yeah, because they don't. There's a multitude of reasons that you're talking Fortune 1000 companies, right? Carbon credits often are seen as a compliance issue, and the turnaround conversation is, do I have to buy them? Like, it's a cost for me, right? But now when we say, hey, actually you can produce them yourself and treat them as an asset on your balance sheet, the conversation goes from a compliance conversation to a CFO conversation. And those that were at the BDO events, you've heard me bang on about, it's now a CFO conversation. It's not a compliance piece, it's an economic piece. So we've had great success changing that tenor of conversation. It's burgeoning. It ruins most of my days. But, companies, it's like turning the QE2, right? You got to turn 2 years before you actually want to turn. That's how slow it's going. But I think once we prove, and we are proving that product, it's just going to turn like that, because you've got so many companies that are making investments off the skin of their own back and not realizing that they can get rewarded for it.
Can I ask a question though?
Yep.
Going back to concrete. So the construction company buys the lower carbon concrete product. The value of that carbon reduction is actually effectively absorbed by the buyer, right? So they're producing and whatever that premium is, I guess is what you're thinking the carbon credit might offset if they monetize the carbon credit.
Well, the way I think about it, and I'm very simple about this, right? And I get this question all the time because I know where you're going. It's the double counting issue, right? We had this yesterday. It's double counting issue. The baseline product that goes into creating that low carbon product, that emissions benefit is not calculated anywhere in the scope 1, 2, and 3 of a large cement manufacturer. It is just resources coming in, energy going into it. That's their scope 1, 2, and 3. The emissions benefit is the comparative analysis between the regular stable carbon that is not low carbon and this manufacturing process that has a much lower basis of carbon intensity. Because it's not industry norm, we can claim that benefit between the original product and the new low carbon product, that delta, they're carbon credits.
That sounds like a good presentation to make and to show that it's working, that, good products, lower carbon products sell.
They do,
Isn't that what it's all about?
100%.
Why do you need a carbon credit to juice the return, so to speak.
Because you need to coax a lot more companies to understand that this is an investment and a financial decision, as opposed to, hey, here's a product. If you invest X, Y, and Z, you could recoup it back by selling it. No, you can recoup back by selling it and selling the credit attached to it.
But it's not easy to sell a credit and it's not easy to create the credit. It's one of the reasons that Triangle Digital is here, because they're helping companies to actually aggregate the data and package it in a way that a buyer would look at it as reliable.
Well, I think it's good. I mean, you
Or
have
sure.
Infor, for example, providing a lot of the supply chain data, which actually, you know, if you have just better practices and more, just better, kind of approach to calculating it, you are getting enough information into the market to inform decisions. And, there are a ton of folks with really high degree of sustainability, in their, sort of business operations. I mean, I live on the West Coast. I'm surrounded by them. And they're doing it because it's good business practice.
Sure.
Carbon market can, exist or not exist. I think they haven't been doing it because of the carbon market.
But for the most part, it's actually not really economically all that viable. Low carbon cement there's a lot of different versions of it. And I've just learned that whether they're underwater or in a well versus used in a building, they have different requirements. I didn't know that before yesterday.
The land dress I told us all about.
Exactly. But it's more expensive.
Right.
So that's a question. And the same is true of cotton that is tracked because it takes energy to track it, and that is low carbon, that hasn't been shipped from where it was grown in Brazil and whatever fertilizer was used to Southeast Asia, where it was processed, to London, where it was made into a shirt, to New York, where it's sold. Reducing all of that costs more.
Yeah, and if you're a thin margin business, I know it's hard, but
But part of this too is like, we need to get to the point where we've got gap style accounting for this, where we can actually tell you, well, this is exactly what we saved, and everyone looks at the math and agrees. And then more importantly, now we're doing these good things. We work with Patagonia. They do everything in earnest. They are really trying to improve their own, footprint on the planet. They know 95% of their carbon is on tier 2 and above. And they're desperate to try to figure this out. Well, because we don't have a standard way to account for this, and also because of so much greenwashing and now green hushing, you're not willing to put that in front of the consumer, that drives the value prop down. But if we had a standard way to account for this, and I could show, hey, this product is now better than our old version of the product because we did X, Y, and Z, and then most importantly, get that out in front of the consumer, I would buy the lower carbon shirt. I would, and then if we want to then further entice them, hey, by doing this, you can also create a carbon credit even better.
I mean, there's a ton of different ways of looking at this and thinking about it, but there's no difference. If anyone's au fait with RPS standards and renewable energy credits in this country, there's no difference in how carbon credits are being created for low carbon products than how RECs are being created for, say, solar, right? I was a solar developer, I put on a ton of weight, lost a lot of hair, doing it, hated it. Now I'm here, but we would work our ass off, build the damn thing, qualify the credits, sell the energy, and sell the credit. What's the difference? You're getting recognition and reward that is driving investment in something that is renewable, low carbon. It's the exact same thing. The only difference we have is the stigma of carbon credits that has stuck with us. Now, we change that because it's engineered carbon credits, not nature-based carbon credits, right? I don't do nature-based because I can't quantify how much carbon stays in a tree and whether that tree's still there. But what I can do is figure out whether a ship is working more efficiently and burning less fuel. Right? That is data, pure, hard facts.
But there's another difference in the solar space, which is regulatory environment that allows very explicitly for RECs to be created and sold, which we would love to have in some other industries, because that really made a difference. It penciled out the math for you to do solar installations.
So let's get people at gunpoint and say you got to buy credits then. That's perfect for me. Perfect for all of us, right?
Start in DC.
It's going to happen. It comes with the maturity of having a gap accounting system addressing carbon credits and the data behind it. But the industry is pretty immature, and that's where someone like Triangle comes in to bring that maturity and that integrity behind the data. But you've got to have companies and people willing to jump off that cliff, like these two. Right?
So Triangle is tokenizing the carbon credits. Are they tokenizing the inputs to the carbon credits, and or is there a case to be made for tokenizing the inputs to a shirt on the supply chain side, or is it better just using traditional databases like you have?
I mean, at the end of the day, what we really need more than anything is a standard. So like and this is part of it. It's expensive right now to collect this data because there is no standard and every company does it in a different way. So if you're a supplier and you're asked to do this 50 different times, which they literally are, it's impossible. We've solved this problem in other areas. There's the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, just for example, created what they call a Higg Index. So our Patagonia, Tommy Hilfiger, et cetera, would go audit their suppliers yearly. They ask the same freaking questions over and over again. Well, why don't we standardize that? And now we have one auditing method for this. Bring that up into the supply chain and start saying, what are your inputs on your factory? What is the wastewater? What is the energy use, et cetera? Make it easy to report, give IoT devices to make it even easier, more accurate. And now everyone's on a level playing field and you go from this very expensive exercise to one that is actually standard and cheap. And that's kind of where we need to go. Standards take forever, but that's how we get there, I think.
Space, because I think that conversation happens in every sector. If we could just standardize it for the supply chain and for the supply, and I mean, it's all of our gold stars. We wish it existed. Are you seeing any traction of it happening, and what can we do to push?
Absolutely, yes. The European Union has already addressed this. You know, they have digital passports and companies are getting in line with doing it. We're seeing in the insurance industry updates to PCAF standards for carbon accounting, and that will make a difference because insurance companies will actually have to measure scope 3, not just sort of throw some numbers up against the wall.
See anything in the technology sector?
Technology sector is a little slower, but we're members of a group called Surpass, which is trying to figure out how do we standardize the digital product passport. A big part of that is what's the data format of that, what is required from both suppliers and factories as well as brands. So this is the first toehold into this. It's going to standards take forever, but we are meeting literally, weekly to try to kind of solve this problem.
And that's been done in the carbon credit space for sure. And the tech industry was heavily involved in defining the data structures and the standards that make carbon credits a lot more reliable.
And that connects back to, is anybody familiar with EC3 for embodied carbon? So it goes back to what we were just talking about with those products. And there's a baseline given on a region where you're building and exactly what that baseline of carbon emissions would be for that structure. And it varies wildly given your geographic location, but it gives you a benchmark of where to go from. And it sounds like that's expanding into the product space beyond something as concrete as a building.
There's also, if you're not familiar with the two, if you sell products into France, which I'm assuming nobody in this room probably does, but if you do, you're going to get a little eco score on your product that tells you what went into it, not beyond just carbon, but across a number of factors. And it's literally like a 4-digit number. It's almost incomprehensible now. But when you start seeing them next to each other, you've got a basis of comparison. And this also starts forming some kind of standard to get at least on the product level. Once you have that standard on the product level, you can start bring this into, well, what goes into a carbon credit that would be adjusted with, changing your score from an 82 to an 83 or whatever.
And is there some financing that's going into that?
From our standpoint, yeah. So Patagonia is a good example. They incentivize their suppliers based on ESG goals, and we work with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, they help fund it. Say, supplier, we're going to set your benchmark. If you hit your target goals on ESG standards, we'll give you better rates, better financing terms. So there is some of that going on today. And what we're looking to do, that works at tier 1 because we have great data in terms of purchase orders and kind of track record as well as ESG data on tier 1s. We're trying to get to deep tier financing, we call it. So that's tier 2s, tier 3s, where you just start to lose visibility immediately. Well, if you're willing to participate in this program and give us data about what you've sent and what your ESG outcomes are, then we can potentially get you that same kind of financing. And it's really about going up the value chain. It's not, you can't just do the tier 1.
Any questions in the audience?
I think we answered them all.
I know.
Have you seen any uses for biochar in products as substitutions, whether it's paper or cement or ceiling tiles or gypsum and drywall, right? I mean, there's probably 1,000 applications, including stopping forest fires because the thermal ignition point's 1,475 degrees Fahrenheit. Has there been any in what you're doing, the services, uses or demand for that?
It's a good question. Me personally, no. But that's very limited to my scope of work at the minute, which is, I'm not going to talk you through it, but it's pretty intense. So we generally focus on manufacturing and industrials and processes, but I'm sure as we go down the pathway and the propagation of the biochar industry, as that continues to grow, the embedding of that within those existing processes is going to be pretty crucial for us. It's a good question because right now I haven't seen it. But I'm also not one to go and put that out there in front of a client and say, hey, have you started looking at this? We're not there yet.
Are you familiar with construction products that have biochar embedded in them?
Not yet, but I know there are tests running, right, as we speak right now. And I know there is a good, healthy supply that comes from growing a plant on farms by U.S. farmers. And some of that is reused on ground cover, right? So it's a 3-in-1 sequestering solution, and it comes from the pyrolysis, the husk, right?
Mhm.
And some of it's used on the ground cover, but there are warehouses that are temperature and humidity controlled right now that have that for applications. So it's a readily available supply chain that can decarbonize those upstream emissions.
It's having a value in Napa, for example, because they can't burn the old vines from the grapes on a regular basis because of the emissions. But biochar creation in those vineyards doesn't have the emissions to atmosphere, it doesn't have the particulate matter because it has that full combustion effect. And then they're putting that back into the wine and increasing water retention and yield of grapes. So there's definitely applications. And then in the generation of the biochar, for everybody else in here, you can mint carbon credits on the generation of the biochar, but the farmer's just going to benefit from all the byproduct of that.
It helps the soil. It retains water at a much higher rate, and the soil health, the pH, right? It makes the farm value go up, right? So there's a lot of applications that actually help.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the thing, there's so many levers we can pull. It's just a matter of coordinating which ones are more relevant to what industry. And my line of sight, like I'll openly admit it to anyone in this room, my line of sight's very narrow because of who we are, our current client base and the industries we need to move into. I hope I'm sitting here and you're asking me these questions in 2 years' time, and I have a team of 50 people doing this, but right now it's a team of 3.
We molded engine appearance covers, right? Prototype parts, right? Because it's great for noise abatement as well as the high temperatures under the hood of an engine that have an ice engine in a vehicle.
I think the challenge with most of these products is finding ways to make them economically viable without carbon credits, where the carbon credits are, the icing on the cake.
Slightly disagree.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more readily financed if you can bank a stream of carbon credits up the front end,
Do
right?
both.
Yeah, we need
Yeah.
both. But there's a real juxtaposition because there's companies that are already doing this stuff, and there's companies who think of it as bullshit. If I can go to them and you can go to them, anyone can go to them and say, hey, HSBC will fund your transformation of this manufacturing process because you get the product and you get the carbon credit and they see a payback period in 12 months. No CFO is going to sit there and go, I don't want to look at this as a realistic opportunity.
So long as there's demand for the carbon credits though, right? Because I think that's one of our challenges. There's feels like insufficient demand.
And Darren and I talk about this all the time. Where's the demand coming from? We had a session of BDO the other day talking about demand on this type of stuff.
I know where it's coming from.
We'll talk about it.
Tech companies.
Tech companies, right? All those direct investments in carbon credit stream.
Yeah, but Microsoft, Amazon, we talked about it earlier this morning. They're going to burn the planet. And they know this, so they're looking for something to offset the risk that they're taking on for that. So that's a market right there for sure.
Yeah, but I refuse to buy into the hurry up and wait philosophy of we need one hand to wash the other. I'd rather there be a supply, and that supply overwhelmingly represents a solution to a market that then realizes it needs one. I look, call me whatever you want, but I do believe in climate change. I do believe it's real, all that type of stuff. We don't get to limiting global warming and having islands disappear. I'm from Australia, it's a big bloody island, but we're not at risk, but our neighbours are, right? We don't get to that without the use of every single tool we've got. And carbon credits is are just one massive lever for us to pull. If we can do that by decarbonising the entire value chain, what are we going to lose?
I was gonna ask, and wrapping up, if what gives you optimism? And we can go down the line, but it sounds like carbon credits are your tool of optimism.
My tour of optimism is I'm taking 2.5 weeks off and going to Argentina and after this in a couple of days. So that gives me optimism. But genuinely, Mike, the work that we're doing together and talking to companies that are traditionally heavy polluters, and I've pointed you guys out a few times, and the work you're doing around capping wells and methane sinks and whatever else you want to call them, I can't remember. The ability to transform that conversation and bring an economic piece to it is going to amplify climate action. And I say this all the time. I come here every year. I don't go to Nest anymore, and I'm very picky as to who I see because I'm sick and tired of having the same bullshit conversations every year. Nothing changes. Right? This room, it was said in the previous session, things are changing. The conversation's changed. The tenor of investment is changing. The vehicles of action are changing. So that gives me optimism.
I mean, and just to kind of hit on this too, like in the supply chain, and we just say this generally speaking, money talks and everything else talks. And that's the only thing that motivates these companies. There are some, there are the Patagonias are the ones that are really earnestly doing this, for the goodness of their heart. But if you can create any financial incentive, they're going to take on to it. So if we can really figure out how to standardize this, it'll work. From my standpoint on kind of what gives me hope is that we've built a system and it's working. It's starting to work. So we're starting to see direct engagement from suppliers. That takes down the holy shit, this is incredibly expensive problem to, well, if they just all did their part, it's actually do. We're starting to see, we had this conversation 2 years ago and it seemed like an impossible bridge to cross. And I said it was a moonshot. We hit the first moonshot a little bit. We have 4 or 5 more to go before we actually start getting this thing to work. But that's what's getting me out of bed in the morning.
What gives me optimism is Moore's Law. So, the incredible increases in volume and efficiency of solar panels, of batteries, of IoT devices that are bringing data together for us to see where the problems and the hot spots are, where we can most effectively apply capital. What I love about carbon credits is that it allows us as a society beyond New York, United States, the global north, it allows us to apply our resources to the most cost-effective means of reducing emissions or reducing carbon in the atmosphere. So Moore's Law is going to save us, if anything.
If it doesn't kill us first.
Yes, if it doesn't kill us.
That gentleman's question about biochar building products. I remember practicing an architect 30 years ago. The biggest impediment to change was the Blue Book, the Uniform Building Code. Not the Alcoholics Anonymous book, but and UL underwriting. So if you're doing it in sort of textiles, then even flame retardant, all that stuff. So that's a huge impediment, and it takes years. I've seen all these carbon negative concrete, non-important cement, and they're fantastic. It's just the years and the millions of dollars you have to do in testing, and then get it certified, and then get it into the databases of all the architectural software, so someone can just pick it from the menu. I think that's the biggest impediment to.
But with concrete, they've been working on it for years now, and it's through most of those processes. And you can build any building in New York with low carbon concrete if you're willing to pay for it.
I do, but to my point, it takes.
Yeah, you got to do all the other stuff too.
It's going to take another 10 years.
It is.
Yeah.
One purchase at a time.
Yeah, we good? Yeah. We're done? No more questions? Am I closing this down? This is your gig.
Get a little break and then the last session.
Right, cool.
Thanks, guys. That was fun.